Then this is another question on regulation, and this one also comes from a United States senator. He says, Mr. LaRouche, let me correct that. It's not from the senator himself. It's from his chief of staff. He says, Mr. LaRouche, the regulatory framework that Treasury Secretary Geithner presented to Congress was certainly impressive in its scope. However, it doesn't address several critical points, and we believe that those omissions indicate something of a serious philosophical flaw. What Secretary Geithner did not ask for is any structural change to the firms that would be subjected to all of the new regulations that he proposed. And this is markedly different from what has been proposed by Paul Volcker. It seems that the Treasury Secretary believes that these new rules that he's putting forward under the control of some kind of risk regulator can keep Wall Street from raging out of control once again. But the fact is that Geithner's proposals do not even contain a serious reining in of the over-the-counter trading that occurs off of exchanges globally. Instead, he has some proposal for over-the-counter trading for derivatives contracts going through a central clearinghouse, but even that clearinghouse will be industry-run. The problem here is that really Geithner doesn't want to address what we see as the central problem. This office was one of the few that opposed the repeal of Glass-Steagall. But the fact is that in light of Glass-Steagall's repeal, the financial sector is much larger and far more complex than anything we have ever dealt with before. Clearly, Geithner and Bernanke along with him have a very strict don't change the structure approach. Our problem is that we see this as a philosophical flaw. Can you address the immediate crisis without broad and deep restructuring of the entire sector?
The short caption answer is you can't. The system is crooked inherently, and the crook has to be treated accordingly. There's no such solution. Where I agree with Paul Volcker, despite our differences on other questions, is that he believes in a clean banking system, one that is actually a banking system. And he's very upset by this sort of thing, I think. He probably would like to use some blunt language, and I might prefer to use a blunt instrument. But what we need to do essentially is we have to put this whole thing into bankruptcy. Let's look back at what's going on here. Look, we're talking about fascism. We're talking about international fascism is what we're really talking about. The British system, the British created fascism. The British created Hitler. Hitler was a project of the British interest, of the Bank of England. What Roosevelt cleaned out in the 1930s temporarily was cleaned out a bunch of fascists. These think tanks, these interest groups, this and that sort of thing, like the American Enterprise Institute, that are all products of fascist organizations, of a network of fascist organizations were planted in Wall Street and so forth from London. And what Roosevelt was taking on was the fascist influence of London. Hitler was created by London. Hitler was created by the Bank of England. George Bush's grandfather, the late president's grandfather, was an agent of the Bank of England who signed the credit slip which got Hitler financed to become dictator. The whole crowd that Roosevelt fought against were a bunch of Nazis who had voted and supported the British in putting Mussolini into power in Italy and putting Hitler into power in Germany, and backed the syndicats in France, which is another version of fascism. So these bankers, the New York bankers, the guys that Roosevelt went against, and the guys who came back to power the day that after Roosevelt died in the United States. This is what you're talking about, the trusts. This is what you call about this kind of interest. They're all fascists. Now, what we're dealing here with, we're dealing with a political economic system which is imperial and international, and the center of its headquarters is London, the British monarchy. That's the center of it, the political center of its organization. And these guys are all a bunch of fascists. Amity Schleese, fascist. American Enterprise Institute, fascist. We have the tape on these guys. We know their pedigrees. We know what pig farm they came from. Huh? And therefore, you have to understand this situation is economic, but it's also political. It's political economy in the true sense. Our problem is the interests which are resisting a rational reorganization of an inherently bankrupt system are all fascist organizations, extensions of the British Empire. And that's your problem. Now, therefore, if you're going to defend the United States, what are you going to do? This force has declared war on the United States. Remember what could have happened in 2007, say September. My proposals were clear. We would have gone through a reorganization without any of this bailout. And we'd be clean today. Not clean of all debt, but clean in the sense of politically clean. What happened is the fascists moved in and took control of the situation and gave us Barney Frank. Right? And gave us that kind of operation. So the problem now is political. Are we going to accept fascist dictatorship? And what these scum represent, which are now controlling the president here. These guys who've taken over, that Time exposed. Remember, Time was not exactly an anti-fascist organization, Time magazine. But Time magazine recognizes today that this fascist bastards bunch is their enemy too. It's going to destroy everything. So they're telling tales out of school, so to speak. And we're dealing with a fascist thing. When I say fascist, I do mean Adolf Hitler, I do mean Benito Mussolini. I do mean these think tanks that Roosevelt sort of kicked back a bit, back in the 1930s. They're back again, and this is the problem. Our job is to destroy them for the sake of the United States and other nations, while at the same time giving fair treatment to every honest citizen and every honest institution. If they suffer, if these swine suffer, sorry, buddy, you're lucky not to be in the dungeon where you deserve to be for your behavior. These guys have no rights. They've forfeited them. They're bankrupt. They cannot claim a right which a bankrupt couldn't claim. And they're not honest bankrupts. So therefore, the point is we have to recognize that this is a political issue. Are we willing to defend the United States and the human race against a takeover by fascism? A fascism as bad or worse than Hitler, a fascism created by the same British monarchy which gave us Hitler. That's the way you've got to think about it. Once you say that, then that clarifies your mind wonderfully. We can now look at the issues from the standpoint, objectively, not assume that these guys are some honest, poor guys who have to be understood.